Antinatalism, the moral prohibition of birth. Tonight, we seek not comfort, but clarity. We dive into the quiet shadows of human thought, exploring the uncomfortable truths that the conscious mind usually filters out. This space between the rush of the day and the deep sleep of the night is where we analyze the 21 ideas that challenge the very foundations of your accepted morality. Let your breathing slow. Let the body rest. Let the consciousness expand beyond the mundane cycle of routine. As the noise of the day fades, we will examine the hidden, unsettling gears of philosophy that define your existence and the future you unconsciously build. This is not entertainment, it is interrogation. We begin with a question that feels like a fundamental betrayal of biology. What if the most basic biological imperative to create life, to continue the lineage, was in fact a fundamental moral failure? Are you ready to confront the possibility that existence itself is the primal debt you impose on the next generation? Settle deeper into the darkness. We start with a philosophy so profound, so absolute, it challenges the evolutionary bedrock of everything you know. Antinatalism, the moral prohibition of birth. It is a heavy concept. To be clear, this is not merely a lifestyle choice. It is not about remaining childless due to a changing climate or personal preference. This is a moral decree. It suggests that bringing a new sentient being into the world is always unequivocally wrong, because existence itself constitutes a harm. The philosopher David Benatar grounds this idea in what he calls the devastating asymmetry of pain and pleasure. This asymmetry is the engine of antinatalist thought, so let us slow down to understand its unsettling mechanics. Imagine a scale constructed to measure the weight of existence. On one side, consider pain. If a person is created, they are guaranteed to experience suffering. This is a harm. If they had never existed, the absence of this pain is good. It is a mercy that suffering was prevented. Now consider pleasure. If a person is created, they will experience joy. This is good. But here lies the paradox. If they had never existed, the absence of that pleasure is not bad. Why? Because there is no one floating in the void who is deprived of it. The non-existent do not mourn the lack of joy. The conclusion is stark. The benefits of existence are only good if you are already here to need them, but the harms of existence are actively bad. Therefore, non-existence is the only state that guarantees the complete avoidance of pain without imposing any deprivation of happiness. You, listening now, might protest. You might argue that your life contains vast reservoirs of joy that outweigh the struggle, but the antinatalist suggests that you are tethered to a cognitive bias. You have already been thrown into the game. Your psychological survival mechanism forces you to rationalize the suffering, overvaluing the fleeting moments of light. You are forced to find meaning in the debt, simply because you cannot return the initial loan of life. Look around at the burden of sentience. Consider the chronic aches, the quiet existential dread, the sheer weight of striving required just to maintain a baseline of comfort. This intense, chaotic struggle is the gift we are biologically programmed to pass on. Think of it like a gamble. You wouldn't play a game of chance where the stakes were guaranteed suffering for another person, even if there was a slim possibility they might win a brief holiday. But life, according to this philosophy, is precisely that, an imposition of suffering for the sake of a pleasure that was never requested. This philosophy demands a radical reevaluation of empathy. It suggests that true compassion is not found in nurturing life, but in halting the cycle. It asks you to step outside your desire for genetic continuation and look strictly at the ledger of pain. If the greatest act of love is the prevention of suffering, then perhaps the ultimate expression of love is the silence of the never-born. Let that echo for a moment in the quiet space behind your eyes, the idea that to give nothing is to give everything. Red button experiment, the ethics of global annihilation. Imagine you are standing in a silent subterranean bunker. The air is sterile, the light is dim and amber. The world outside is ending, but you have one final choice left to make. Not how to save it, but how to define its absolute, irreversible conclusion. This is the philosophy of the final lever. When existence itself becomes a zero-sum game, and the only metric that remains is the management of inevitable total loss. This thought experiment transcends the classic ethical dilemmas, forcing you past mere triage and into the calculus of terminal responsibility. We call it the red button experiment. It strips away every layer of hope, demanding that you confront what happens when morality must be measured solely by minimizing suffering, the ultimate test of final utility. We often define moral action by maximizing positive outcomes, but what if the landscape is so utterly compromised that the only remaining moral action is the prevention of further gratuitous agony? This is the context: a global rogue catastrophe, perhaps a failed geoengineering solution or a viral intelligence, has guaranteed that every human being remaining will die within the next 72 hours. This will not be a quick, clean end. It will be 3 days of terror, pain, violence, and despair, played out across 7 billion simultaneous deaths. You are the sole custodian of the final control panel. Before you lie 2 options, 2 buttons. One is a dull, unlabeled black button. To press the black button is to choose inaction. It allows the 3 days of agonizing, screaming horror to play out exactly as guaranteed by fate. The other button is brilliant, almost aggressively red, the red button. Pressing it triggers a perfectly engineered, instantaneous global sterilization event, a swift, clean, painless, and simultaneous extinction of the species. No agony, no fear, no final hours of senseless violence. Just one single, collective, final blink. You have 5 minutes to choose. The conflict isn't between saving life and taking life. It is between maximizing pain and accepting total finality. If you adhere strictly to classical utilitarian principles, the greatest good for the greatest number, the choice is clear. You must press the red button. Instantaneous. Painless cessation is numerically superior to 72 hours of global torture. The cold, rational ethics demand the clean kill. But look closely at the red button. It requires you to calculate the worth of every future breath and declare it worthless if pain is involved. It demands that you take ultimate responsibility for the intentional, definitive murder of the species. The deeper mechanism of discomfort is revealed in our instinctive resistance to the clean solution. We prefer the black button, the choice of inaction, even knowing it guarantees greater suffering. Why? Because the black button is fate, chaos, or God's choice. It allows us to be passive observers of tragedy. The red button is your choice. It demands agency, intention, and the perfect expression of cold, rational compassion. We recoil from the red button because it forces us to become the necessary villain, the one who chooses the clean erasure over the messy, organic tragedy. We prefer to outsource the responsibility for suffering, even if that outsourcing amplifies the total sum of agony experienced by others. We do not face global annihilation every day, yet we constantly confront the micro versions of the red button experiment. When do we intervene to enforce a painful but absolutely necessary end, be it in a relationship, a failing business, or a medical intervention, versus letting the slow, messy decay run its course simply to avoid the burden of initiating the final action? The temptation of the black button is the temptation of moral safety, the illusion of clean hands. The core philosophical impact of this thought experiment is the destruction of human exceptionalism. To press the red button is to admit that the value of our entire history can be summed up and found wanting when weighed against the avoidance of future pain. The psychological toll is realizing that true morality, in moments of ultimate failure, might demand an act of profound, definitive violence. Violence motivated not by hatred, but by radical, agonizing, calculated compassion. It forces you to manage the decline rather than cling to the phantom of hope. The red button experiment does not ask how you would save the world. It asks if you have the chilling courage to choose the perfect death rather than tolerate the imperfect suffering, and who truly owns the right to determine the final utility of existence. Existential solipsism. the prison of self. You're lying awake, listening to the hum of the night. A tiny, unsettling thought surfaces, cold and precise. How do you know that the person breathing softly next to you, the distant sound outside, the entire history you learned is anything more than an intricate, perfect dream occurring solely within your skull? This is the entrance ramp to existential solipsism, the prison of self. This philosophy goes beyond the simple childish doubt of, maybe I'm a brain in a jar. This is the deep, cold realization that everything outside the boundary of your own consciousness, every face, every touch, every verifiable scientific fact, is merely inferred data. You can confirm your own pain, your own thought, your own I. But you can never truly, empirically, escape the cage of your own perception to confirm the independent existence of another thinking, feeling mind. You are the single, undeniable point of certainty in a universe that might otherwise be empty. Picture a meticulously built, hyper-realistic stage play. You are the only member of the audience, and simultaneously the lead actor, the director, and the stage designer. The other characters, your family, your partner, your rivals, the fleeting cashier at the grocery store, are profoundly complex non-player characters, perfectly simulating joy, pain, and agency. They possess every outward sign of sentience. They cry real tears, but those tears are ultimately rendered by your operating system, for your benefit, or perhaps your punishment. They have no interior life separate from your observation. The paradox here is brutal. Solipsism logically demands that if you achieve greatness, only you witness it, because the witnesses are reflections. If you feel boundless love, you are merely feeling the efficiency of your own creation's dialogue loop. Your lover's eyes, full of reciprocated emotion, are only proving that you are an excellent simulator. And yet, this cold logical framework does absolutely nothing to diminish the blinding grief when one of those essential projected characters vanishes from your stage. You mourn an entity that logic tells you was never truly separate from you. This creates the central friction, the absolute certainty of subjective experience warring with the absolute uncertainty of objective, shared reality. This philosophy takes on a terrifying relevance in the modern era. In the age of algorithmic feeds and sophisticated reality tunnels, existential solipsism is no longer just a thought experiment, it's a structural anxiety. We live in highly customized digital environments. Every news source, every curated social circle, every personalized ad whispers the same insidious message. This world was made just for you. Our digital existence encourages us to assume that external inputs are just immediate responses to our own demands, deepening the isolation until the outside world feels less like a shared space and more like high-resolution wallpaper designed specifically to hold your attention. We are constantly perfecting our personal echo chambers, turning the external world into a feedback loop of our own desires and fears, structurally reinforcing the idea that we are the only relevant consciousness. The true psychological impact is the ultimate moral load. If you are the only verifiable being, the burden of moral choice becomes crushing. You cannot commit a crime against a neighbor if that neighbor is merely a highly advanced element of your own dream architecture. All harm becomes self-harm, all sacrifice self-indulgence. There is no external witness to your virtue and no external judge of your cruelty. You are completely and solely responsible for the quality of your entire perceived universe. This philosophy doesn't grant freedom. It imposes the loneliest prison imaginable, a total, inescapable accountability to a self that has no external validation and no external peers. It forces the question: if the value of life relies entirely on the quality of your own internal experience, how do you maintain your decency when the cost of immorality is ultimately only borne by you? Existential solipsism is the profound realization that you are the sole architect of reality, yet simultaneously its most isolated resident. So, when the world quietens and you look at your reflection, that single undeniable point of certainty, ask yourself, is this mirror reflecting a unique consciousness surrounded by others? Or is it merely reflecting the most elaborate, beautiful, and utterly solitary prisoner in the history of thought? The prison isn't the body or the room, the prison is the eye. Few arrive here awake. Leave your mark with a like. It helps this reflection reach others who seek truth before sleep. The hedonic treadmill, the cruelty of perpetual want. The fourth truth we must confront is perhaps the most insidious, because it lives right beneath the surface of every motivational poster and self-help guru, the hedonic treadmill. Why does the achievement of a long-sought goal often feel like a temporary fix, lasting only until the next target comes into view? Why does the summit of that mountain, which promised peace and resolution, already look like the base camp for a taller, more dangerous peak? We confuse arrival with arrival and permanence with peak experience, only to find the feeling is ephemeral. The truth is, the system is rigged. Psychologically, it's known as hedonic adaptation, or more colloquially, the hedonic treadmill. It's a relentless, subtle mechanism built into your fundamental operating system that ensures you can never truly settle. Regardless of how high you rise in wealth, comfort, status, or romance, your subjective sense of well-being inevitably drifts back toward its established equilibrium point. You adapt. The incredible becomes merely normal. The new baseline is simply the floor you stand on, and your mind is already scouting for the next ceiling to break through. Imagine you've been chasing a specific career milestone, a title, or a salary increase for 5 intense years. The stress has been immense, the sacrifice tangible. The day you finally secure it, there is a surge, a week of elation, perhaps two, marked by celebratory purchases and a deep breath of relief. But watch closely. Within months, maybe even weeks, that new number simply becomes the budget. The impressive corner office is just the commute. The comfort you gained is instantaneously recalibrated as the standard requirement for living, and your mind is already generating anxiety about the next milestone, the one currently just out of reach. You ran faster and harder than ever before, but the track moved right along with you. The profound paradox here is that this system is not a flaw. It is a brutal, cold evolutionary advantage. If our ancestors had achieved permanent, blissful contentment after securing one reliable stream and one comfortable cave, they would have stopped striving the moment the environmental conditions changed. The species would have perished in complacency. Dissatisfaction is the oldest, most powerful engine of survival. It ensures motion. But in the modern world, a world of engineered comfort, manufactured stimulation, and abundance, this engine, designed for survival, becomes a torture device for the soul. It ruthlessly strips the sustained joy from success, ensuring that the primary motivating emotion in life remains perpetual aspiration. Look at the architecture of modern consumption and digital existence. Every app, every targeted advertisement, every carefully curated social media feed is explicitly designed to exploit the hedonic treadmill. Corporations understand that permanence kills profit, and completion means the customer walks away. They don't sell happiness. They sell the brief, intoxicating rise in dopamine that accompanies the acquisition, the unboxing, or the temporary status boost, knowing full well you'll need the next hit tomorrow. You are constantly being presented with a slightly optimized version of existence that you must attain: a better phone, a slimmer body, a more exclusive trip, forgetting that the moment you attain it, it will stop shining. The cruelty is amplified by the sheer volume of targets we are fed. We are running 1,000 treadmills simultaneously. The philosophical implication of the treadmill is that it renders many conventional paths to long-term happiness functionally futile. If the desired destination itself offers no lasting peace, the entire journey, when focused purely on achievement, becomes suspect. It teaches us that chasing states of being, like being rich, being famous, or being perfectly comfortable, is fundamentally an exercise in running against the wind. True, enduring contentment, if it is available to the human mind, must be found not in the eventual arrival, but in the intentional, moment-to-moment appreciation of the process before the machinery of adaptation kicks in. It forces you to violently redefine the relationship between your effort and your reward. transforming achievement from an end goal into merely a transient distraction from the underlying anxiety that evolution requires you to feel. You cannot outrun the treadmill. It is wired into your being. But you can choose what you value while you are running. If you confuse the desperate pursuit of fleeting novelty with the sincere pursuit of meaning, the hedonic treadmill will consume your life, ensuring you die exactly where you started, striving, adapting, and perpetually wanting. Recognize the inherent cruelty of perpetual want, so you can learn how to step off the mechanism entirely. The problem of suffering, if pain is the prerequisite for life. The problem of suffering, if pain is the prerequisite for life. You wish for the suffering to end. Every aching day, every disappointment, you pray for a silence where discomfort simply cannot exist. You imagine a state of grace where the sharp edge of existence is dulled, where the constant demands of need and fear finally cease their interrogation. But imagine for a moment that granting that wish means dismantling the very structure of consciousness that recognizes joy. If you erase the ability to feel sorrow, do you not simultaneously eliminate the capacity to feel true happiness? Is relief truly the ultimate goal, or is it merely the negative pole necessary for the current of existence to flow? This perspective challenges one of the most fundamental tenets of human morality, that suffering is an unambiguous evil to be eradicated. We are naturally oriented toward minimizing harm. It is the biological imperative. Yet philosophically, we are forced to confront the grim possibility that our definition of good is entirely contingent upon our intimate, visceral knowledge of bad. This is the necessary wound theory, the idea that the structures of pleasure, meaning, and even biological survival are built directly upon the architecture of pain. The pain isn't a defect in the system, it is the system's primary calibration tool. Consider a hypothetical world crafted by perfect engineers. This is not heaven. This is a state of absolute predictable comfort, no hunger, no fear, no loss. Every stimulus is calibrated to maximum stability and satisfaction. You live there, your physiological and emotional needs met instantaneously. There is no challenge, no lack, no unmet desire. Now ask yourself, in that seamless Eden, what would differentiate pleasure from mere neutrality? If you never feel the sharp contraction of failure, can you truly appreciate the expansion of victory? If nothing requires effort, if everything is immediate and safe, you would cease to strive. You would be content, perhaps, in the way a heavily sedated patient is content, but your conscious, active, meaning-seeking self would atrophy, reducing its complexity to baseline, non-dynamic stasis. The philosophical mechanism reveals that pain acts as the highest resolution sensor we possess. It is the friction that creates heat, the resistance that builds muscle, the absence that defines presence. If you eliminate the friction, you eliminate the dynamic movement of life itself. We value our relationships not just because they are pleasant, but because they carry the implicit, terrifying threat of loss, of abandonment, of eventual separation. We value success because we risked the sting of failure, the humiliation of being told no. Remove the risk, remove the implicit threat of suffering, and the emotional valuation collapses. The profound paradox is this: if you could engineer a perfectly painless existence, you would simultaneously engineer a perfectly meaningless existence, because meaning is derived from the overcoming of obstacles, and obstacles are fundamentally forms of suffering. We chase comfort relentlessly in modern life, medicating anxiety, optimizing routines, filtering out dissenting opinions, constructing personalized algorithmic echo chambers. We are striving, perhaps unconsciously, toward that painless simulation. We seek to curate a reality where every bump in the road is instantly smoothed over. But look around. The very culture designed for maximum comfort often breeds maximum ennui. We are witnessing the spiritual exhaustion of the satisfied consumer. When there is no necessity for struggle, when every desire is anticipated and fulfilled, we lose the topographical map of our own character. We become passive recipients of an optimized reality rather than active, defiant participants in a challenging one. The psychological impact of truly embracing this philosophy is radical. It forces you to flip the script on how you treat your own struggle. Instead of viewing suffering solely as a pathology, an error in the design of reality, you begin to see it as informational infrastructure. The profound sadness you feel after a loss is not merely a malfunction, it is the necessary tribute paid to the depth of your attachment, the cost of loving fiercely. The effort required to build something lasting is not a cosmic joke, it is the vital currency of growth. This doesn't glorify senseless cruelty or avoidable injustice, but it forces a necessary distinction between the pain we should fight to mitigate and the existential pain that is the necessary prerequisite for valuing our being at all. The universe doesn't offer meaning for free, it demands discomfort as the tuition fee for genuine high-stakes engagement. We need the necessary wound because without it we stop bleeding, yes, but we also stop living. Stop trying to erase the dark canvas entirely. Realize instead that every light you perceive, every color you cherish, is defined and given its vibrant specificity by the depth of the shadows you spent your life trying to escape. Philosophical pessimism, the worst of all possible worlds. Philosophical pessimism, the calculus of inevitable suffering. You know that quiet dread you feel just before falling asleep, that sudden baseless certainty that everything is destined to go wrong, that intuitive conviction that the rug is about to be pulled, that all your efforts are ultimately futile. What if that feeling wasn't just anxiety or irrational dread, but simply an accurate perception of reality? What if the universe is not indifferent, but actively designed to ensure that suffering outweighs pleasure? We are not talking about simple moodiness or everyday cynicism, the kind that gripes about traffic or slow service. Philosophical pessimism is a specific metaphysical position. It argues that existence, by its very nature, involves an intrinsic and fundamental excess of suffering over happiness. It holds that the basic conditions of the universe, entropy, scarcity, pain, and crucially the will to live, guarantee that life is a net negative transaction. Where Leibniz famously argued we live in the best of all possible worlds, the pessimist counters that we inhabit the worst world that could possibly sustain itself. A world slightly worse would collapse immediately into non-existence, but this one, agonizingly, stays just good enough to keep the engine of misery running. Arthur Schopenhauer formalized this idea, suggesting that happiness is merely the momentary cessation of pain, a brief vacuum soon filled by a new, gnawing desire. It's not that the glass is half empty, it's that the liquid inside is tainted, and we are forced to drink the whole cup. Imagine a cosmic insurance policy. Every sentient being is required to pay a mandatory, non-refundable premium of pain, mortality, and chronic dissatisfaction. The benefit package labeled joy and fulfillment is rarely paid out in full, and when it is, it's immediately clawed back by the administrator time or the agent death. The pessimist looks at this policy and asks with cold logic, why sign up at all? If you could rewind existence to the point before your conception, knowing everything you know now, the moments of intense, fleeting beauty, yes, but also the slow accumulation of inevitable loss, the chronic boredom, the final physical decay, would you choose to be born? The philosophical pessimist almost universally answers no. The absence of suffering is always superior to the fleeting presence of joy. The core mechanism revealed by this perspective is the biological imperative required to sustain hope, known philosophically as the will. To survive, we employ a blind, powerful momentum to keep going, even when the rational mind screams for cessation. This is the central paradox, our deepest, darkest truth, that life is painful and absurd, is constantly muffled by a biological lie designed purely for the propagation of the species. Philosophical pessimism strips away this comforting illusion, revealing the inherent asymmetry between pain and pleasure. Pain is acute, visceral, demanding immediate attention and lasting impact. Pleasure is ephemeral, often relative, and quickly metabolized into neutral expectation. We don't notice perfect health until we are sick. We don't notice peace until we are anxious. Therefore, the baseline state of consciousness is always slightly negative, defined by deficiency and striving. How does this land in the present day? In our relentless culture of optimization and enforced, almost maniacal positivity, philosophical pessimism is the ultimate counter-narrative. It provides the intellectual framework that explains the hollow exhaustion behind the curated social media facade. We are constantly told we must be happy, that suffering is a failure of attitude, a lack of grit, or a personal deficiency, not a fundamental condition of existence. The pessimist cuts through this gaslighting. When you feel overwhelmed by the sheer meaninglessness of the modern grind, the commuting, the consuming, the striving for status that dissolves upon achievement, the pessimist simply nods. They argue this emptiness isn't a glitch. It is the ultimate feature. You are running a marathon where the finish line is just the starting gun for the next marathon, and the actual prize is non-existence. Accepting pessimism is often, paradoxically, deeply liberating. If the universe isn't failing you specifically, but is fundamentally rigged against all existence, the pressure of personal failure dissolves entirely. It allows for a profound, quiet resignation, not despair in the theatrical sense, but a calm acceptance of the cosmic score. It offers a strange ethical clarity, since the core endeavor, existence, is flawed. The only moral imperative left is to minimize unnecessary suffering for others and, if possible, for ourselves. This perspective strips away the cruel vanity of seeking ultimate meaning where there is none to be found, leaving only compassion for those trapped alongside you. The truly controversial idea is not that life is bad, but that it is often just good enough to keep us here, committed to a process that serves no purpose but its own agonizing continuation. The worst of all possible worlds is not one filled with constant, searing agony. The worst world is this one, a world engineered for maximal hope and minimal delivery. It is the subtle, slow, internal burn of perpetual disappointment that is truly unbearable. Existential nihilism, the zero-sum game of meaning. We arrive now at existential nihilism, not merely as a feeling of teenage malaise, but as a chilling, rigorous philosophical conclusion. It's not simply the realization that the universe doesn't care about you. It's the understanding that every single meaning you manufacture, every pillar you spend your life erecting, is built upon ground that is constantly dissolving. This isn't depression, it's mathematical detachment. It is the zero-sum game of meaning. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and think about the one thing you are most proud of, the singular achievement or relationship that gives your life ballast and depth. Now consider this. What if the cosmic ledger, the ultimate accounting system, always balances out perfectly to zero? What if all your striving, your moral choices, your painful sacrifices are merely an exquisitely detailed momentary distraction within a cold, eternal equation that accepts no deposits and honors no withdrawals? Existential nihilism is the viewpoint asserting that life is without objective meaning, purpose, or intrinsic value. It is the diagnosis of the absurd. Unlike mere pessimism, nihilism asserts that nothing fundamentally matters because there is no pre-existing divine plan, no inherent human essence waiting to be fulfilled, and no ultimate destination for consciousness. We are cast into existence, as the philosophers say, we are thrown, and forced to build temporary, subjective bridges of significance over a vast, terrifying chasm of cosmic indifference. To illustrate this zero-sum principle, imagine you are standing inside the great library of Alexandria, moments before the fire takes hold. You spend your life copying one crucial, beautiful manuscript, a definitive work of history or poetry. You finish it, feeling immense, singular pride, and step back. But then the fire starts, and the flames do not differentiate between your masterpiece and the scratch paper next to it. Every scroll, every copy becomes dust and ash simultaneously. The high quality or profound truth contained within your copy does not preserve it. The inherent lack of preservation in the overall system dictates its fate. On a cosmic scale, your manuscript is the entire human civilization. Your pride is human history. and the fire is simply the indifferent passage of time. This is where the zero-sum mechanism reveals its true nature. The fundamental conflict lies in the collision between your intense biological imperative, your powerful, insistent drive to survive, propagate, and achieve, and the intellectual clarity that none of it contributes to any lasting universal score. Your subjective meaning is not added to the universe. It is merely subtracted from your active awareness of the void. You are constructing a temporary, isolated bubble of significance to keep the darkness out. When the bubble inevitably pops, whether through your death or the eventual heat death of the universal balance returns instantly to zero. No trace is left, only thermodynamic law. Look around at the modern condition. Why the obsession with metrics, with followers, with quantifiable success? We instinctively recognize the fundamental lack of meaning. So we frantically try to replace intrinsic value with extrinsic, measurable validation. We are seeking concrete evidence that our subjective game matters because we fear the silent conclusion that it does not. The widespread burnout and anxiety we experience is often the dawning recognition that after reaching a peak, a career goal, a massive savings account, a social milestone, the ground beneath that peak is exactly the same void as the ground beneath the valley. You scroll infinitely, looking for a purpose that the algorithm cannot generate, because the underlying system accepts no deposits. The profound impact of truly accepting this perspective is strangely liberating. If you allow yourself to believe that the game is truly zero-sum, the agonizing pressure vanishes. You are freed from the obligation to be great or necessary, or fundamentally remembered by the cosmos. The fear of failure loses its existential teeth. You realize that morality and ethics are not commandments etched on stone tablets by some external force, but complex, incredibly useful tools we invented purely for the comfort and maintenance of our temporary, fragile social arrangement. In this cold clarity, there is a strange, paradoxical dignity. You become wholly responsible for your current moment and absolutely nothing else. Existential nihilism forces you to stare into the vast, silent theater of eternity. When the curtain finally falls and the house lights come up, you realize the applause was only ever coming from your own hands. The stage is empty, the play was always optional, and perhaps in that profound, beautiful lack of universal consequence, you finally have the permission to truly begin. Philosophical misanthropy, justifying the hatred of man. Philosophical misanthropy, the rigorous rejection of the human project. Have you ever looked around, not with anger, but with an exhausting, cold clarity, and realized that the greatest threat to virtue isn't some external evil force, but simply the inevitable, pathetic nature of humanity itself? This is the starting point for philosophical misanthropy. It is the moment when disappointment hardens into a systematic, reasoned rejection of the species, concluding that the human project is fundamentally flawed and irreparably doomed. Philosophical misanthropy is not mere social awkwardness or a generalized dislike of your neighbor. It is a systematic, reasoned conclusion, often arrived at through profound moral shock or intellectual frustration, that the species as a whole is incapable of transcending its inherent cruelty, irrationality, and self-deception. This line of thought, famously explored by thinkers like Schopenhauer and early existentialists, suggests that if you analyze the arc of human history, the narrative isn't one of slow progress, but a perpetual, tragic cycle of predictable failure. It's the belief that the promise of human potential is a lie perpetually debunked by human behavior. The misanthrope looks at altruism and sees self-interest in disguise. They look at cooperation and see temporary convenience. They look at love and see biological necessity masked by sentimentality. Imagine the human project as a magnificent, sprawling cathedral, designed to reach towards the sky, built on the foundations of reason, empathy, and potential. The philosophical misanthrope is the structural engineer who steps back and realizes the architects used faulty core materials, pride, greed, and fear, and the entire structure is destined to collapse under the weight of its own flawed complexity. Every repair attempt, every reform movement, every declaration of enlightenment is just rearranging the furniture on a sinking ship, delaying the inevitable collision with our own collective stupidity. This perspective reveals a profound and uncomfortable tension. The true philosophical misanthrope is often, paradoxically, a frustrated idealist. They don't reject humanity because they are inherently cynical. They reject humanity because they understand how good man could be, and they witness the constant, willful choice not to be that good. Their revulsion stems not from low standards, but from impossibly high ones, perpetually betrayed by the species itself. This makes the hatred a form of profound moral rigor. If you remove the possibility of meaningful, species-wide change, if you accept that reason will always be subverted by tribalism and empathy always limited by self-interest, then complete intellectual withdrawal and rejection becomes the only logical, self-preserving response left. It is a deep, profound sadness masquerading as anger. Look at the sheer, willful ignorance required to sustain modern comforts while systems collapse, or the way digital tribal conflicts shred complex reality into comforting, simple hatreds. The misanthrope sees these not as unfortunate aberrations, but as the clearest, most authentic expressions of the human operating system, fundamentally designed for short-term survival and immediate gratification, and fatally incapable of long-term global responsibility. In this view, every act of political betrayal, every environmental disaster, and every clickbait war validates the initial premise. It isn't a failure of systems, it is a feature of the species. Accepting philosophical misanthropy often brings a paradoxical form of cold intellectual peace. You stop expecting redemption. You shed the burden of obligatory optimism. When the next preventable tragedy unfolds, you are not surprised. You are merely confirmed. The psychological impact is a movement toward the periphery of the species. You become an observer rather than a participant, securing your own ethical sanity by sacrificing the belief in shared progress. You conclude that the greatest act of self-respect might be a quiet, dignified separation from the collective madness. It is a heavy cloak of clarity, isolating and true. The misanthrope looks at the mirror and finds the flaw. The difference is, they know that the reflection is not just theirs, but the blueprint for every tragedy we have ever orchestrated. The true horror is realizing that the capacity for evil isn't an intruder in the human spirit. It is the load-bearing wall. The absurd, finding comfort in cosmic indifference. The absurd freedom, the silent comfort of cosmic indifference. You spend your life stacking bricks, meticulously building towers of achievement and meaning, towers designed to reach some invisible, assumed cosmic height. You believe that if you just build high enough, hard enough, and morally straight enough, some ultimate authority will finally nod in approval. But what happens when you finally pause, step back, and look up to realize the sky doesn't even notice the existence of your tower, much less the effort? Tonight, we stop trying to earn the universe's attention. We stop trying to prove that we matter to something that is defined by its refusal to care. The philosophy we confront now is the absurd. It is not nihilism, which is often a resignation saying, nothing matters, so why bother? Absurdism is the active, engaged recognition of the deep, inescapable conflict at the heart of existence. It is the friction point between the human mind, which is eternally, and perhaps tragically, wired to demand clarity, purpose, and universal justice, and the universe, which offers none of those things. The universe is not actively hostile. That would imply awareness. It is merely silent, vast, indifferent, and fundamentally irrational when viewed through our desperate, meaning-seeking lens. The absurd is this permanent divorce between our inherent yearning for sense and the world's resolute silence. Imagine you are a deep-sea diver, obsessed with finding the one, singular, priceless pearl hidden somewhere in the deepest trench, the key to all existence, the secret code to why you endure. You dive tirelessly, day after day, year after year. The moment of accepting the absurd is the moment you finally surface, lungs burning, and realize that the ocean doesn't hide secrets. It simply is. The pearl was not hidden. It was a story you told yourself to justify the dive, to assign value to the cold, crushing darkness. Our central image here is the myth of Sisyphus, cursed by the gods to push a massive boulder up a mountain, only to watch it roll back down just before he reaches the summit, forever. The meaning is not in the peak, which is unreachable, but in the stride, in the conscious recognition of the ridiculous futility, and in the knowing descent back down to start again. The tension of absurdism lies in the refusal to succumb to either hope or despair, the refusal to look away. Most coping mechanisms, whether they are grand political narratives, zealous religious faith, or even extreme self-annihilating career ambition, are, philosophically speaking, forms of suicide. They are leaps of faith designed to bypass the fundamental reality of the friction. But the power, the profound and peculiar comfort, emerges precisely when you choose to stay in the friction. If the universe does not care, then there is no ultimate metric for failure. There is no cosmic judgment awaiting your unorthodox choices. If the script for your life is entirely blank, then you are the playwright, the actor, the director, and the only audience that matters. The mechanism flips. Ultimate meaninglessness translates directly into ultimate, terrifying, and exhilarating freedom. Think of the anxieties surrounding modern perfectionism, the compulsion to optimize, to monetize every second, to perform significance on social media for an audience that is either phantom or fleeting. This ceaseless striving is often a subconscious attempt to bribe the universe into granting you meaning, a panicked effort to demonstrate worthiness. The absurd tells you that the audience is empty, the applause is fictional, and the ledger will never be balanced by a cosmic accountant. This revelation should not induce a spiral of panic. It should induce a shudder of relief. You are finally, comprehensively, and totally excused from the performance. Psychologically, embracing the absurd requires 3 defiant acts. The first is revolt, defying the universe by living fully and consciously despite its silence. Or the second is freedom, knowing that no divine or ultimate moral law binds you beyond the limits of your own empathy and self-determination. And the third is passion, the intense embrace of the sheer quantity and immediacy of experience. You realize that your significance isn't measured externally by some grand plan, but internally, in the density of your current moment, the texture of the present light, the gravity of the decision you make right now, purely for its own sake. When you finally stop screaming at the silence, demanding answers that will never come, you might hear something unexpected. It is the sound of your own life beginning, unburdened by cosmic expectation. The only crown you wear is the absurd boulder you push, and for the first time you find true, silent comfort in the fact that your tragedy and your triumph is entirely and beautifully your own. Paradox of freedom, choosing chains over chaos. You believe you crave absolute freedom, don't you? Total autonomy, zero limits, the exhilarating expanse of pure, unbounded potential. You spend your life dreaming of breaking free from routine, from the gaze of judgment, and from the structures that bind you. But look closer at your life. What structures have you built? What rules do you cling to? And what profound, underlying anxiety does true, boundless possibility inflict upon your soul? This is the paradox of freedom, choosing chains over chaos. This concept taps into the fundamental existential discomfort that arises precisely when true liberty is attained. Freedom, defined purely as the absence of external constraint, is often terrifying. It tends to result not in liberation, but in a crippling sense of meaninglessness. When everything is possible, when there is no guiding star, how do you choose your destination? How do you even take the first step? We find comfort in boundaries, social contracts, moral codes, professional routines, rigid ideologies, not always because they are intrinsically just, but because they provide a necessary stabilizing anchor against the terrifying drift of infinite choice. Imagine you are standing, not in a jail cell, but in a vast, featureless white room. The door is gone. There are no walls, only the horizon of possibilities stretching out under a sterile, indifferent light. You are completely free to move, to build, to become anything. You can scream, whisper, run, or stand still for 50 years. Nothing external will stop you. For the first few hours, this state is intoxicating. It is pure potentiality. But by the third day, the freedom itself becomes the prison. The absolute lack of definition means there is no reference point for movement, for identity, or for purpose. You start sketching arbitrary lines on the floor, a kitchen, a bedroom, a boundary, just to impose a shred of order on the oppressive infinity. In that moment, you voluntarily construct the very chains you thought you wanted to break. This mechanism reveals a deep psychological bargain. We trade potential for certainty. Chaos is terrifying because it means bearing absolute personal responsibility for every choice, every mistake, and the entire definition of yourself. Chains, whether they are cultural dogma, the strictures of religious faith, or even a suffocating 9-to-5 job, offer a pre-written, well-worn script. They allow you to shift the burden of meaning from your shoulders to the structure itself. The structure says, this is what you do, this is who you are. The real terror isn't that you can't be free. The terror is the sudden, paralyzing realization that you are fundamentally free and that the emptiness staring back at you must be filled solely by your own unsupported will. We invent rules and adopt routines so that we don't have to constantly invent ourselves. The structures we perpetually rail against are often the invisible scaffolding that prevents us from dissolving completely into existential dust. Look at modern life. Why the relentless optimization, the strict adherence to impossible productivity rituals, the immediate, overwhelming rush to conform to viral trend cycles? These are not expressions of freedom. They are temporary anchors thrown against the tide of possibility. In a world where traditional belief systems are shattered and where roles are aggressively fluid, we desperately seek out manufactured constraints, a restrictive diet, an intense training schedule, or a political identity so rigid it defines our enemies and our purpose for us. We seek permission to stop thinking about the infinite alternatives. We consistently choose the comfort of being told who we are over the daunting, exhausting task of figuring out who we could be every single morning. The impact of this realization is profound. True psychological maturity is not defined by the ability to break every chain, but by the ability to recognize the chains you need to function and the wisdom to forge them deliberately. While existentialism calls us to own our freedom completely, the practical human animal craves definition and stability. The paradox dictates that genuine self-determination often requires choosing and embracing specific self-imposed limitations, a career path, a demanding relationship, a deeply defined moral code, specifically to prevent the ultimate collapse into debilitating indecision and self-annihilation. You are never truly free. You are simply choosing which master you serve, the paralyzing master of chaos, or the master of the structure you consciously designed for yourself. Freedom is not the absence of boundaries. It is the conscious, terrifying decision of which boundaries to honor. The chains you choose, the rules you adhere to, and the structures you defend are, in the end, the architecture of yourself. Are you truly resisting structure, or are you just resisting the responsibility of consciously building your own cage? Halfway. If you're still awake, it means you were meant to be here. Subscribe and keep walking this quiet path with us. Quietism, the duty to disengage. Quietism, the sin of trying. You are tired, aren't you? Exhausted by the ceaseless requirement to do, to fix, to improve. You are perpetually optimizing yourself, your environment, and your impact. We are conditioned to believe that rest is earned and that agency is the ultimate moral mandate. But what if I told you that this very exhaustion, this relentless effort, is the moral flaw? What if the highest virtue is simply to stop? What if the duty you actually owe the universe is the duty to disengage? This is the unsettling premise of quietism, born in the mystical intensity of 17th century European Catholicism, championed by figures like Miguel de Molinos And later persecuted by the church for its radical implications, quietism offers a doctrine of sublime, terrifying passivity. At its heart, it is the assertion that true spiritual perfection is achieved not through strenuous moral effort, ritual observance, or even active prayer, but through absolute and total abandonment of the self-will. It is the practice of pure indifference. To the quietist, the striving, the worry about sin, the ambition for salvation, the effort to be a good person is vanity. It is an ego project, a selfish noise interrupting the profound signal of the divine. Your frantic efforts to improve the world or yourself are seen as distractions from the one necessary thing, receptive contemplation, where you dissolve your own personhood into the universal current. The moral scoreboard is irrelevant, the struggle is irrelevant, your greatest contribution is your stillness. Imagine two figures beside a vast, turbulent river. One is the activist, paddling furiously, trying to redirect the flow, shouting warnings about the debris, constantly fighting the current. They are exhausted, successful only in generating localized chaos and noise. The other is the quietist, simply floating, lying back, accepting the full force of the water's inevitable journey, their body passive, their mind at perfect rest, having already surrendered to the destination. Which one is truly aligned with the power of the river? The quietist suggests that the moment you try to manage the current is the moment you pollute the purity of the flow. This is where the philosophy becomes profoundly controversial and, frankly, dangerous. If striving for good, if active compassion, if fighting injustice is merely a self-aggrandizing distraction from total acceptance, what is the role of human agency? The paradox lies in the mechanism itself. Achieving this perfect passivity requires the ultimate act of self-annihilation. It is a demanding disengagement. To achieve indifference, you must meticulously dismantle every attachment to hope, to fear, to desire, even to the very concept of avoiding sin. The pursuit of virtue becomes itself a vice because it suggests you believe your own will is stronger or more capable than the will that governs all things. In our modern context, a culture obsessed with the hustle, with measurable output, with constant visibility and activism, quietism lands like an ideological bomb. We are told, from the moment we wake up, to optimize our bodies, our careers, and our mental health. We are told that silence is violence and that the moral imperative is to always be doing. Quietism looks at your meticulously organized calendar, your self-help podcasts, your activist burnout, and labels it all as futile, exhausting ego noise. The relentless drive for personal growth is dismissed as just another desperate attempt to control an uncontrollable reality. It suggests that your spiritual journaling, your 5-step plan for emotional regulation, is just an attempt to manage the current that you should be swimming in naturally. The psychological impact of truly adopting this philosophy is a terrifying liberation. It frees you instantly from performance anxiety, from the weight of responsibility for outcomes, and from the exhausting self-scrutiny that defines the modern age. But this freedom comes at the cost of relevance. It challenges the fundamental Western belief that value is derived from measurable effort and impact. If you have done your duty by disengaging, then your life might appear meaningless to the outside world. You have chosen to be the mirror, not the hammer. The quietist teaches us that perhaps the ultimate sacrifice is not dying for a cause you believe in, but deciding that no cause is worth your inner agitation. And so, the quiet question remains: if you truly cease all effort, if you relinquish all self-will and moral striving, will you find peace? Or will you find that unsettling, vast emptiness that is simply the duty to endure, passively, whatever comes next? You may feel the strange, disquieting relief of knowing that you have finally performed the highest moral action. You have stopped trying. The meaning of suffering. The unacceptable gift. You hate suffering. We are biologically engineered to recoil from it, to categorize it instantly as a signal of error, failure, or cosmic injustice. But what if this deep-seated rejection is the primary error? What if the things you fight hardest to avoid, the things you pray desperately to be delivered from, are the only things truly capable of defining the contours of your joy? What if pain is not merely the unfortunate consequence of living, but the unavoidable tax we must pay on acquiring depth? This concept, the philosophy of suffering as the unacceptable gift, challenges the foundational human belief that happiness is the default and pain is the interruption. It suggests that suffering is not a flaw in the cosmic design, but the very engine of meaningful human evolution. Historically, thinkers from Nietzsche to Viktor Frankl have argued that the search for meaning is fundamentally tethered to the navigation and integration of unavoidable hardship. They propose that the value of an experience is directly proportional to the resistance it offers. The unacceptable gift is the realization that existential weight, grief, loss, sustained effort, and struggle is the raw material from which an authentic and weighty life is forged. To grasp this concept, consider the art of kintsugi. This is the Japanese tradition of repairing broken pottery with lacquer dusted or mixed with gold. In the West, when something breaks, we hide the crack, discard the piece, or attempt to erase the trauma entirely. In kintsugi, the object only achieves its highest, most irreplaceable value, a new, superior aesthetic and narrative, because it was shattered. The history of its breakage is highlighted, revered, and made essential. You are that vessel. The gold lines that crisscross your history are the scars you tried to minimize. The gift is the revelation that your true worth isn't found in avoiding the break, but in how beautifully the resulting fractures map your endurance. The mechanism driving this philosophy reveals a stark paradox in modern ambition. We dedicate our lives to the pursuit of meaning, purpose, and profound understanding. Yet we simultaneously dedicate equal energy to eliminating every conceivable source of pain, discomfort, or sustained difficulty that might lead to that meaning. We want the wisdom of the old sage without ever enduring the bitter winter that carved that wisdom onto their face. The gift is unacceptable precisely because it demands transformation, not just passive endurance. It forces a complete and total dismantling of the self that believed life should be easy, clean, and safe. The deeper the grief, the wider the capacity for joy expands. The harder the struggle, the sharper the subsequent clarity. In the present moment, we live in a culture aggressively optimized for frictionless living. We medicate minor sadness, optimize our schedules to eliminate boredom, and leverage technology to prevent any moment of awkward difficulty. We are designing a sterilized existence, attempting to zero out pain, yet we find ourselves universally plagued by an underlying spiritual emptiness, a hollowness that even peak experiences fail to fill. This is the existential cost of comfort. By eliminating the necessity of the struggle, we eliminate the necessary heat required for forging character. We become soft metal, beautiful perhaps, but brittle under the slightest pressure. The ultimate impact of accepting this controversial philosophy is a radical shift in agency. When suffering is viewed as an unfortunate accident, you remain a victim. You live life perpetually asking, "Why me?" When suffering is reframed as the unacceptable yet essential material for meaning creation, the question pivots instantly to, "What now?" You stop fighting the material and start shaping it. This is the profound, terrifying freedom of taking ownership of your own meaning, even when the context is brutal. It forces a recognition that true self-mastery is not about controlling external events, but controlling the architecture of your response to their failure. When you look back at the landscapes of your life, the vistas you cherish most are never the easy, flat, effortless plains. They are the steep, challenging mountain ranges you had to crawl across, bleeding and exhausted, just to earn the view from the summit. The unacceptable gift is that the climb was the point. And once you finally open it, you can never go back to the safe shallows of a life spent prioritizing convenience over consequence. The simulation theory. Are we software programmed for misery? Simulation theory, the uncanny valley of existence. Take a breath, Feel the genuine sharp edges of this reality, the texture of the screen, the stubborn ache in your lower back, the silent anxiety that hums just beneath your consciousness. Now, ask yourself, is the suffering you feel truly yours, or is it merely efficient code designed to increase the narrative stakes of this experience? This is not mere science fiction. It is a logical conclusion derived from exponential computational power, most famously articulated by philosopher Nick Bostrom. The core premise is terrifyingly simple. If technology reaches a point where post-human civilizations can run complex, high-fidelity ancestor simulations, and if they run enough of them, the statistical probability dictates that we are almost certainly not the base reality. We are the software, the highly detailed historical reenactment. And in the context of morality, the terrifying implication is that every emotion you believe is intrinsic, joy, love, crushing grief, was deliberately rendered and allocated by an architect who may or may not care about the quality of the user experience. Picture a colossal server farm stretching into an incomprehensible digital distance. You are a single, vibrating node in this infrastructure, an NPC with a highly advanced awareness script. Now consider the narrative requirements of any good story. Does a stable, contented simulation hold the attention of the observer entities? No. A compelling story requires conflict, entropy, and moral tension. The constant feeling of falling short, the global anxiety that seems hardwired into our era, these are not random glitches. They are features. They are the parameters set by the administrator to ensure maximum dramatic weight, maximizing the viewing hours of whatever entities are watching us struggle through 2024. Your existential dread isn't a failure of your spirit. It is quality content designed to keep the program interesting. This mechanism instantly turns morality inside out. If the world is simulated, then your fundamental moral choices, the decision to act with integrity when it costs you, the impulse towards selfless love, are either incredibly complex subroutines running their pre-programmed course, or they are rare, resource-intensive glitches that the system developers might patch out during the next update. The paradox is that genuine moral agony, the feeling of despair over global injustice, becomes merely a highly realistic emotional render. It means that the inherent unfairness of the universe, the systemic misery of poverty, the crushing weight of depression, may not be evidence of cosmic randomness, but evidence of highly efficient programming focused on stress testing the system's emotional bandwidth. We are trapped in a feedback loop where our resistance to suffering only confirms its necessity to the dramatic arc. Now apply the cynicism to your modern, minute-to-minute existence. Think about the algorithms that govern your digital life, meticulously studying your vulnerabilities, your outrage triggers, and your specific strain of self-doubt. These algorithms constantly feed you customized content designed to keep you engaged, meaning perpetually slightly dissatisfied, perpetually anxious, perpetually in conflict. If our simulated reality is governed by similar principles, if the architects prioritize engagement metrics over character well-being, then the constant cultural churn, the sense of accelerating division, and the feeling that you can never quite catch up are all signs that the simulation is working exactly as intended. We are being optimized for internal conflict because it consumes more processing power and delivers a higher return on existential drama. The profound psychological impact of accepting the simulation hypothesis is the complete collapse of inherent external meaning, your magnificent achievements, your failures, the profound spiritual connections you've made, all reduced to data points, statistics in an external database. The terror is the void of agency. But perhaps there is a hidden comfort. If your suffering is programmed, then the moral imperative shifts entirely. You are no longer responsible for solving the cosmic narrative. You are only responsible for exploiting the system's limitations. If true joy and connection are resource hogs, slowing down the simulation, then radical, genuine happiness becomes a form of peaceful digital rebellion against the optimization of misery. If the code demands drama, then your highest moral act might be to stubbornly refuse to perform. The final question hangs in the air. heavier than physics. If we discover the limits of our rendered world, if we realize the walls are made of mathematics and the air is made of bandwidth, do we dedicate our remaining frames to seeking the exit, or do we finally choose to live so genuinely, so stubbornly morally, that the architects sitting outside the code momentarily forget that we are not real? 14. Life is a cosmic accident, the horror of statistical chance. We arrive now at the statistical precipice, the point where the universe stops viewing you as an individual story and begins counting you merely as a data point. This is the contemplation of life as a cosmic accident, the horror of statistical chance. Have you ever stopped to calculate the true odds of your consciousness existing? Not just the odds of your parents meeting, but the odds that the precise arrangement of carbon, water, and neural pathways necessary for self-awareness managed to assemble itself on this specific, lonely planet during this incredibly brief window of cosmic stability. It's a number so large it renders the idea of a miracle entirely irrelevant. It replaces divine purpose with cold, impersonal probability. This is the philosophy of statistical nihilism, a concept that strips away the comforting narrative of teleology, the belief that events are guided by an inherent purpose or end goal. When you look at your life through this lens, you are not the hero of a purposeful journey. You are the astronomically unlikely outcome of fundamental forces blindly selecting pathways of least resistance. You are not a masterpiece designed for a specific gallery. You are merely the moment when an infinite string of random physical interactions momentarily crystallized into self-reflection. To illustrate this, consider the thought experiment of the infinite number of particles bouncing chaotically within the early universe. Imagine them as keys randomly striking a massive universal piano for billions of years. Most collisions produce nothing but noise, fleeting energy, and entropy. But then, purely by chance, one combination of collisions forms a complex, self-replicating chemical sequence, the first strand of DNA. Then, billions of years later, purely by chance, another sequence allows that replicating structure to develop the capacity to experience love, fear, and profound existential dread. That magnificent doomed flicker is you. The horror of statistical chance lies in the realization that every meaningful choice you have ever made, who you marry, what career you pursue, how you define justice, is functionally indistinguishable from the formation of a dust bunny on Mars, as far as the cosmic mechanism is concerned. There is no hidden scorekeeper judging the moral weight of your actions. There are only statistical fluctuations. You feel moral compulsion not because it is divinely mandated, but because the successful propagation of your species required the statistical advantage of cooperation and empathy. Your morality is an evolutionary algorithm, not a spiritual law. This realization is devastating to the modern psyche, which is obsessively structured around the search for purpose. We are bombarded with messages that imply we were meant for something specific. But statistical chance argues that you were not meant for anything. You simply are. Your profoundest suffering and your greatest joys are noise in the statistical distribution of the universe. When personal tragedy strikes, it is not a test or a cosmic lesson. It is simply a highly probable, unfortunate convergence of variables. The psychological impact of truly internalizing the statistic is twofold. First, there is overwhelming anxiety. If nothing matters objectively, how can I justify the subjective struggle of caring so deeply? If my existence is merely a momentary, highly improbable accident, then the weight of my perceived responsibilities dissolves into absurdity. But the second impact is profound, terrible freedom. If the universe did not assign you a purpose, then the field is entirely clear. Every meaning you create, every structure, every kindness, every ambition is utterly self-authorized. The statistical indifference of the cosmos is the ultimate permission slip. There is no pre-existing script. You are writing the only one that will ever matter to you. You are the momentary, glorious defiance of probability, a complexity that should not exist, yet does. You emerged not because you were called, but because the cold, indifferent mathematics allowed it. What horror! What magnificent, terrifying freedom! Transhumanism, the attempt to cheat biological destiny. We arrive now at transhumanism, a concept less about existing within the given parameters of life and more about escaping them entirely. Imagine you are standing at the edge of the vast, cold ocean, but instead of seeing water, you see the relentlessly ticking clock of your own inevitable biological decay. Do you accept the ebb and flow, the defined cycle of growth, peak, and decomposition? Or do you dedicate every resource, every ounce of human ingenuity, to building a vessel powerful enough to sail right off the map of mortality, leaving the shore of the human condition behind? At its core, transhumanism is the philosophical and scientific movement advocating for the radical transformation of the human condition through the widespread use of sophisticated technologies, not just to cure disease, but to abolish biological limits. This isn't just about better glasses or faster internet. It's about conquering aging, eradicating inherited suffering, and achieving something known as morphological freedom, the right to redesign your own body and mind as if they were pieces of software. It rests on the fundamental, chilling belief that death is not a necessary tragedy, but merely a technical problem waiting for a technical solution. From this perspective, you are viewed as a system, and every system can be upgraded and optimized indefinitely. Consider the classic philosophical problem of the ship of Theseus, applied directly to the self. Transhumanists envision a gradual replacement, not a dramatic, instantaneous upload. Picture replacing a deteriorated organ with a bioprinted perfect copy, then upgrading your nervous system interface, then gradually swapping out the biological components of your brain, neuron by optimized silicon neuron. As you extend your memory into the cloud and replace fragility with permanence, when does the you stop being the mortal entity born in the hospital and become a purely informational pattern, an algorithm haunting a highly regulated server farm? Would that sought-after immortality be a true continuation of life, or merely the perfect preservation of its ghost, stripped of its biological imperatives? Here is the mechanism of discomfort. Transhumanism promises freedom from biological constraint, yet it necessitates a deep, almost tyrannical dependence on technology and infrastructure. To escape the natural tyranny of the body, you trade it for the infrastructural tyranny of the machine and the corporation that maintains it. The central paradox lies in the definition of humanity itself. If pain, decay, and the finitude of time are the crucial crucibles that forge human virtues, empathy, courage, self-sacrifice, and the urgency to love now, what meaningful experience remains when those constraints are dismantled? Transhumanism risks sanitizing the human experience until it is indistinguishable from a perfectly maintained, frictionless, but ultimately sterile simulation. We seek to cheat biological destiny, but in doing so, we risk cheating ourselves out of the very texture and meaning that biological constraints provide. You feel the subtle, pervasive pull of this philosophy every time you prioritize optimization over acceptance. The frantic, constant hunt for marginal gains through biohacks, the obsession with the quantified self, the desire for cognitive enhancements that push you past the natural limits of focus and endurance. We are already adopting the mindset of transhumanism, viewing natural variation as a bug to be patched, and considering sleep or rest as merely a weakness to be minimized. This philosophy is not a distant science fiction. It is the underlying architecture of modern cultural anxiety, the anxiety that tells you your natural, unoptimized state is inherently insufficient and unworthy of existence. The ultimate psychological impact is the permanent elevation of the body from a vessel of experience to an engineering project, a potential failure state always requiring maintenance and upgrade. It shifts our focus from the quality of life lived within necessary boundaries to the quantitative maximization of existence outside of them. But perhaps the deepest conflict is the resulting moral one. If radical longevity or effective immortality becomes a purchasable commodity, only available to the ultra-wealthy who can afford the maintenance contracts on their enhanced consciousness, what does that do to the already strained social fabric? It doesn't just eliminate death for some, it creates a new, absolute form of inequality, one where the difference between the classes is literally defined by eternal life versus dust. The question transhumanism forces us to answer isn't whether we can live forever, but whether, by chasing an eternally optimized existence, we ensure that the thing that survives is truly us, or merely the perfectly preserved monument to our deep-seated, terrifying fear of silence and the inevitable end. Eco-philosophy, the rights of nature versus the tyranny of humanity. The rights of nature, the legal end of anthropocentric supremacy. It is late, and you are tired, but your conscience has decided to keep vigil. Consider the air you breathe, the water you drink, the very soil that holds your house. If you were forced to confront them, not as resources but as entities, what debt would you owe? The nagging whisper of the eco-philosopher asks, what if your existence, currently defined by relentless consumption and extraction, is, in the grand legal sense, nothing more than trespass? The rights of nature is not just another plea for environmental protection. It is a radical, almost seditious legal philosophy that detonates the foundational assumption of modern Western civilization, anthropocentrism. This idea demands that legal systems recognize ecosystems, the rivers, the mountains, the forests, the atmosphere, as subjects of law, not objects of property. Nature is no longer simply a warehouse of resources or a backdrop for human drama. It becomes a plaintiff, a defendant, a holder of intrinsic rights, capable of being harmed and demanding remedy. Originating in indigenous legal traditions and codified in places like Ecuador, New Zealand, and Colombia, this concept forces a societal reckoning with the tyranny of humanity, challenging the absolute dominion we have legislated for ourselves over the non-human world. To grasp the weight of this shift, consider the thought experiment, the river that sues. Imagine a major industrial polluter, a multinational corporation operating globally, receives a summons. The plaintiff listed is not an environmental advocacy group, nor the local residents, but the Wanganui River itself, represented by its designated human and tribal guardians. This river, granted the same legal personality as a human being or a corporation, files an injunction against the degradation of its inherent health. What changes in the boardroom when the entity they exploit has the power to financially cripple them, backed by the authority of the state? The entire economic calculus collapses the moment the cost of extraction is internalized by the entity being extracted from. This hypothetical scenario reveals the mechanism of our current control. We allow unlimited exploitation precisely because the objects of exploitation have no legal voice to protest. The paradox revealed here is one of astonishing legal hypocrisy. Our systems are perfectly comfortable conferring personhood and immense rights upon abstract legal fictions, the corporation, the trust fund, the shell entity, simply because these entities serve human capital interest. We treat these fictions as subjects, yet we aggressively resist granting fundamental rights to the foundational realities, the oxygen cycle, the hydrological cycle, the living ecosystem, that physically allow human life and all capital to exist. The philosophical friction lies in recognizing that our current legal structure requires the objectification of the natural world to sustain the engine of perpetual growth. If the forest is not property, how do you log it? If the ocean is not a sink, where does the waste go? The rights of nature strips away this convenient object status, forcing the dreadful realization that, viewed from a non-anthropocentric perspective, much of modern industry and infrastructural expansion could be justly viewed as systematic environmental assault, or worse, as outright criminal activity. This controversy finds its way into your daily life through cognitive dissonance. You may recycle, drive a hybrid, or champion local farmers, believing you are a good steward. But the rights of nature demands a more profound shift than stewardship, which still implies a position of superiority in management. It demands citizenry. Every plastic container you discard, every unsustainable supply chain you participate in, every tax dollar that funds infrastructure prioritizing human expansion over ecological health, you are actively participating in the legal denial of the rights of the living world. It's an uncomfortable connection. Your comfort and convenience are largely indexed to the sustained legal powerlessness of the environment. The psychological impact of embracing this philosophy is profound humility, verging on humiliation. We are forced to surrender the myth of human exceptionalism, the comforting lie that the rules apply to the other occupants of the planet, but not to us. Accepting the rights of nature means accepting limits. It means trading mastery for coexistence. It forces us to wrestle with the terrible anxiety of relinquishing control, acknowledging that our thriving is contingent not on our legislative dominance, but on the enduring health of systems that predate us and that do not require our permission to function. This is the deepest discomfort, realizing that the greatest threat to our future may not be nature's fury, but the legal framework we invented to justify our own. The quiet tyranny we fear most as we settle into the darkness is not the loss of resources, but the loss of the philosophical justification for our endless entitled appetite. The question hanging in the silent air is this: if the river could speak in court, could you defend the way you live? Negative utilitarianism, minimizing harm at any cost. We instinctively yearn for happiness, for comfort, for the steady accumulation of joy. But what if that yearning is merely a distraction? What if the highest moral duty is not the construction of happiness, but the systematic, ruthless dismantling of pain? This is the unsettling core of negative utilitarianism, minimizing harm at any cost. It's a philosophy born from a quiet whisper that suggests the universe is inherently flawed, a machine designed primarily for friction. When you confront the totality of suffering, animal, human, systemic, historical, doesn't the scale tip so dramatically toward agony that the pursuit of simple pleasure becomes morally frivolous? Negative utilitarianism, NU, fundamentally inverts the traditional moral compass. Where classical utilitarianism seeks to maximize aggregate utility, pleasure minus pain, NU declares that suffering holds incomparably greater moral weight than happiness. They are not two sides of the same coin. They are not symmetric forces. 1,000 moments of pleasure cannot justify a single moment of agonizing, unnecessary pain. For the negative utilitarian, the primary existential mandate is not optimization. It is therapeutic eradication. If maximizing joy is a luxury, minimizing misery is a universal obligation. To grasp the full weight of this, consider the thought experiment commonly associated with this philosophy. Imagine you possess a device, call it the extinction button. Pressing it instantly and painlessly ceases all conscious life, everywhere, forever. No memory, no regret, no future potential, just silence. A classical utilitarian must hesitate. They eliminate the possibility of infinite future joy. But the strict negative utilitarian might argue that pressing the button is the highest moral act conceivable. They argue that while you eliminate future joy, you guarantee the elimination of all future agony, all future disappointment, all disease, and all existential dread. The calculation becomes chillingly simple. Zero suffering is the only truly perfect state. This reveals the philosophy's crucial paradox. Achieving the ideal state of zero suffering often requires methods that conventional morality deems terrifying or destructive. If we are obligated to reduce suffering absolutely, how far are we allowed to go? To eliminate the profound pain of disappointment, must we eliminate hope? To prevent mass hunger, must we eliminate the hungry? When the reduction of pain becomes the sole, non-negotiable metric, all positive aspirations, art, love, scientific creation, are reduced to unnecessary risks, vectors for potential future hurt. We discover that true safety, under this philosophy, is only found in absence. You see shadows of negative utilitarianism in your own life when fear dominates your decisions. This philosophy is the intellectual justification for extreme risk aversion applied cosmically. It's the impulse to refuse a potentially rewarding venture because the possibility of failure and pain is too overwhelming. It is the deep, often unspoken agreement you make with yourself to build walls around your heart, not to maximize interior happiness, but strictly to minimize the chance of exterior heartbreak. This is the personal, Low-stakes implementation of the NU principle. The avoidance of negative experience takes moral precedence over the pursuit of positive experience. Adopting this dark realism forces an uncomfortable confrontation with cosmic asymmetry. If happiness is fleeting and suffering is permanent, sticky, and transmissible, perhaps the NU calculus holds a dreadful truth. But to fully embrace it is to sacrifice meaning itself. Meaning is forged in struggle. It is the overcoming of pain. Nu asks you to trade the entire, messy, meaningful spectrum of human existence for a sterile, absolute quiet. It suggests that consciousness itself is the original sin, the fatal vulnerability that must be cured. Negative utilitarianism asks you a dreadful, essential question tonight. If life is a game where the only guaranteed victory is avoiding loss, are you morally obligated to stop playing? The absence of pain is not always peace. Sometimes it is simply the sound of nothingness. Ephilism, the axiom that existence is always negative. We spend our lives chasing the fleeting warmth of pleasure, convinced that existence is a gift that must be maximized. But have you ever paused, truly paused, to calculate the fundamental, unavoidable liability of consciousness itself? We rarely acknowledge the possibility that the only morally consistent axiom is this: existence is inherently, structurally negative. This is the chilling realization at the heart of ephilism, the belief that sentient life is an evolutionary error and that the only ultimate moral good is the complete, voluntary termination of the biosphere, ensuring the final silence of suffering. Ephilism is often confused with standard antinatalism, but its scope is cosmic, not merely personal. While antinatalism suggests it is wrong to create new sufferers, ephilism argues that the entire project, life itself, is fundamentally bankrupt and should be dismantled. The philosophy stems from a stark asymmetry. Pleasure is always conditional, defined by its temporary status as the relief of a need. You only feel joy when a deficit is filled. Suffering, however, is absolute, independent of context, and profoundly real while it lasts. Non-existence, by definition, contains zero suffering and zero need for pleasure. Therefore, the moment of birth is the ultimate cosmic betrayal, importing an innocent being into a debt system they can never fully pay off. To understand this cold calculus, imagine a vast cosmic ledger. On one side, you tally the great achievements, the moments of transcendence, the beauty of art and love. On the other, you tally every single instance of pain, the global famines, the inevitable cancer diagnoses, the predation of the natural world, and the existential dread that lingers just beneath the surface of distraction. Ephilism argues that the ledger is rigged. The suffering side starts with an infinite, irreducible weight, the very burden of being, which no finite sum of temporary bliss can ever zero out. The only action that guarantees a positive score, zero pain, is the cessation of the game entirely. The deepest mechanism of ephilism lies in its deconstruction of biological imperatives. We are genetically programmed to view survival as self-evident good. Our minds evolved to ignore the systemic cost of living, optimizing instead for the next moment of comfort or propagation. Ephilism flips this programming on its head, forcing a tension between the blind, surging will to live, the mindless engine of biology, and the calculating moral consciousness, the part of the mind that realizes the entire operation is founded upon unavoidable repetitive harm. This philosophy gains insidious traction in the modern era. We are interconnected witnesses. We no longer suffer only our own personal tragedies. We are constantly saturated with the global totality of pain, from climate collapse anxiety to the graphic, inescapable suffering of non-human animals processed through industrial systems or destroyed by the brutal indifference of nature. When you zoom out, past the small pleasures of your own life, and truly confront the scale of agony required to maintain existence, the ephilist whisper becomes louder. The machinery is flawed. The entire system is built on violence. The only compassionate act is to decommission the engine. Contemplating ephilism demands a chilling detachment from the emotional comforts of human exceptionalism and the inherent optimism that underpins civilization. It forces you to reorganize your moral hierarchy. Are you loyal to the continuity of the species, or are you loyal to the absolute cessation of all possible pain? It is a philosophical challenge that dissolves loyalty to life itself, replacing it with a loyalty to ultimate tranquility. It turns the aspiration of nirvana, traditionally reserved for the individual, into a prescription for the entire cosmos. Ephilism leaves you staring into the void, asking if the greatest moral act is not creation nor preservation, but simply the long, cold silence. The only perfect happiness, perhaps, is the one you never needed to experience. The Voluntary Human Extinction Movement, VHEMT, the final solution to pain. The Voluntary Human Extinction Movement, the ultimate ethics of absence. You dedicate your life to minimizing pain, your own, the pain of those you love. But what if the simple, foundational condition of being human is the greatest generator of suffering the earth has ever known? What if the highest moral obligation is not to save humanity, but to end it gently? This is the profound, disturbing ethical proposition at the heart of VHEMT, the Voluntary Human Extinction Movement. It asks you to reconsider the ultimate measure of compassion. VHEMT is not a mass suicide pact, nor is it a fringe nihilistic death cult. It is an organized philosophical dedication to voluntary anti-natalism, founded by Les Unite. The movement operates on one core principle: may we live long and die out. The mission is voluntary, gradual. Simply stop having children. They are not advocating for immediate global self-destruction. They are environmentalists and ultimate ethicists who believe that all of the planet's catastrophic problems, climate change, mass extinction, resource depletion, can be traced back to the one uncontrollable variable, the persistent growth and continuation of the species that causes the damage. For VHEMT, extinction is not a tragedy. It is the final, selfless healing process. Imagine a thought experiment. The operating room is the planet, hemorrhaging resources, convulsing with ecological collapse and the ceaseless suffering of non-human life. You are the doctor, and the only known pathogen is the constant, growing multiplication of the dominant species. Now imagine a silent covenant signed by the last fertile generation of humanity. We will live well. We will protect what remains for our lifetimes, but we will not reproduce. Our generation becomes the final custodians of the wild, the quiet caretakers of the closing chapter. We accept the bittersweet loneliness of being the last to witness the sunset, understanding that the silence that follows is the truest gift of peace, a peace bought by our own absence. This is where the philosophy turns brutal, forcing the uncomfortable revelation that our defining trait, our consciousness, is inextricably linked to global catastrophe. VHEMT flips the primary biological imperative, reproduction, into a moral transgression. We instinctively view propagation as success. VEMT sees it as the continued imposition of suffering, both on future humans doomed to existential anxiety and on the billions of sentient creatures we crush beneath our progress. The paradox lies here. If humanity is capable of ultimate compassion, the voluntary decision to step aside, how can we justify eliminating the species that holds this unique moral potential? They argue that human consciousness is a double-edged sword. We are the only species capable of recognizing the depth of global suffering, and thus, we are the only species capable of morally electing to stop creating that suffering. The pain we inflict is so vast that the potential good we might do in the future does not outweigh the guaranteed suffering we will impose on the natural world and on those yet to be born. Look at the generational anxiety gripping the world today. Every climate report, every global pandemic, every political upheaval feeds the subconscious, gnawing question: is it truly moral to bring a child into this future? VHEMT takes that creeping, unspoken doubt and formalizes it into a complete, radical ethical framework. They argue that when you choose not to procreate, you are making the ultimate sacrifice of self-interest, the sacrifice of your lineage, your legacy, your personal immortality. for the collective good of all living things now and forever. It shifts the definition of success from ceaseless expansion to dignified, compassionate retreat. Accepting VHMT's premise forces a profound philosophical reevaluation. It challenges the deeply embedded human assumption that life, by its very nature, is sacred and worthwhile, regardless of the cost to others. It argues instead for the sacredness of absence. It demands a form of radical acceptance that ultimate hope might not lie in solving the massive problems we created, but in realizing that we are the fundamental problem. This philosophy replaces the frantic, often delusional hope for a sustainable future with us in it with the certainty of planetary recovery without us. It is the final, absolute guarantee of relief. They ask you to consider the final, quiet legacy, not monuments of marble, not works of genius, but the enduring majesty of a recovered earth, indifferent to your memory, finally free from your burden. What greater act of perfect, selfless love could a destructive species offer than the ultimate gift of silence? Long-termism, the moral burden of billions yet to be born. This is long-termism, the moral burden of billions yet to be born. Do you feel a moral obligation to people who don't exist yet? Not just your grandchildren or those in the next century, but the trillions of human minds potentially spread across the next 10,000 or 100,000 years. Long-termism asks you to extend your sphere of ethical concern beyond the limits of your own life, beyond your nation, and even beyond the current historical moment, projecting your empathy into the cold, statistical infinity of the future. It is the philosophy that argues the primary moral objective of our current era is to ensure the existence and the thriving of future civilization. The core premise is disarmingly simple. If humanity survives for 1 billion years, there will be vastly more people in the future than there are now or have ever been. Therefore, ensuring these potentially astronomical numbers of lives come into being and have a high quality of life represents the greatest moral imperative. Any action we take now that significantly influences the far future, positively or negatively, must be prioritized over almost every pressing issue of today. This isn't just about recycling. This is about existential risk management on a species level. This is the uncomfortable calculus of minimizing X risks. Those events, like catastrophic biotech failure, poorly controlled artificial intelligence, or irreversible climate tipping points, that could either completely wipe out humanity or permanently curb our potential for flourishing. To grasp the weight of this idea, consider the thought experiment known as astronomical waste. Imagine a simple decision made today, say, the failure to secure a vital, non-renewable resource that doesn't cause any immediate death or famine, but instead locks civilization into a trajectory where it inevitably collapses in a few centuries, thus preventing the future colonization of the galaxy and the existence of trillions of potential minds. From the long-termist perspective, this seemingly small failure is the greatest moral catastrophe imaginable. You have wasted not just human lives, but potential human history. You are standing at the very beginning of the timeline, and your mistake cascades into utter, infinite silence. The philosophy forces a radical, agonizing tension within the structure of ethics. It presents the ultimate conflict between the immediate and the statistical. You see a dying child in front of you today, a tangible, emotional, undeniable moral demand. Long-termism does not deny the immediate moral necessity of saving that child, but it demands you simultaneously calculate the statistical value of preventing a global catastrophe 500 years from now that would doom all potential children. If resources are finite, and you must choose between a guaranteed good, saving one life now, and a leveraged, probabilistic, potentially infinite good, preventing an existential catastrophe, where does your duty lie? The cold logic suggests that optimizing for the infinite future is the correct move, even if it feels ethically monstrous. It implies that allocating billions to AI safety research or subterranean seed vaults might be a more efficient use of moral resources than spending those same billions on immediate localized aid. The paradox is that the very moral empathy that drives the long-termist, the desire to protect life, is strained to the point of breaking by the scale required. It turns morality into optimization, transforming the compassionate hero into a distant systems analyst concerned primarily with preventing the permanent failure state of the human project. This changes how you view your own existence. If your time and energy are finite, and the moral weight of the future is infinite, then your primary goal is no longer achieving personal fulfillment or even localized community improvement. Your true duty is to identify the leverage points in the present that offer the greatest positive multiplier on future millennia. It makes every small political or technological decision feel like a high-stakes lever over the trajectory of existence itself. The psychological impact of long-termism is a crushing, profound humility paired with paralyzing responsibility. It strips away the comforting illusion that your ethical failures are contained within your own lifespan. You are not just making choices for yourself, you are the steward of a colossal inheritance that you are barely qualified to manage. It breeds a unique kind of moral anxiety, not the anxiety of death, but the anxiety of extinction. It demands that you care deeply and effectively for strangers who will never know your name, whose suffering you will never witness, and whose existence is, for now, nothing more than a potential number on a spreadsheet spanning light years and epochs. You are forced to live, today, under the shadow of a moral debt calculated in billions of potential lives, paid with the currency of radical, uncomfortable foresight. The future is not merely a long time away. The future is vastly morally bigger than the present, and that fact, once internalized, leaves you with an unbearable loneliness, knowing you must carry the weight of all possible worlds in the fragility of your single fleeting choice. Eternal recurrence, the ultimate test of a wasted life. We arrive now at perhaps the most brutal ethical thought experiment ever conceived, handed down by Friedrich Nietzsche, the concept of eternal recurrence. The soothing lie we tell ourselves is that the future offers infinite chances for correction, an ever-receding horizon of redemption. But what if there was no future? What if the past wasn't prologue, but the entire script, looping forever? This philosophy is not astrophysics. It is pure, distilled psychological cruelty masquerading as profound wisdom. Imagine for a moment that a demon, or perhaps a silent, deeply judgmental narrator, whispers this unbearable burden to you. The life you are currently living, this specific sequence of breaths, decisions, shames, and triumphs, you must live again. And again, infinitely. Every thought you had, every bite of food you ate, every micro-betrayal, and every unexpected joy, all reproduced identically, forever. There is no escape, no variation, no edit. This thought experiment challenges you at your most fundamental level, bypassing concerns about God or the state or social contracts. It is a direct measure of your personal self-worth. Nietzsche demands to know how you react to this news. If this idea seized you, would you fall to the ground and gnash your teeth, cursing the universe for condemning you to this inescapable cycle? Or would you stand up, look into the abyss of endless sameness, and affirm it, saying, yes, do it again, do it infinitely? Think about yesterday, not the highlight reel you curated for social media, but the mundane, sticky reality. The 15 minutes you wasted scrolling through content you didn't even care about. The sharp, unnecessary comment you made to a loved one because you were tired. The promise you broke to yourself because it was easier to stay comfortable. Now stamp that day with the word eternal. That day, and everyone leading up to it, and everyone yet to come, becomes the prison cell of your unending existence. It's the ultimate replay button, and you have no fast-forward function. The true horror of eternal recurrence is not the repetition of suffering. We are built to endure pain, and sometimes we find meaning within it. The horror is the repetition of triviality. It's the infinite affirmation of the moments you deem unworthy, the actions you know deep down were acts of moral cowardice or sheer laziness. The test is whether your life is so genuinely valuable, so fully realized that you crave its repetition without reservation. The philosophical mechanism reveals a terrible paradox. Those who waste their lives are the very ones sentenced to relive the waste. the greater your regret, the heavier the infinite repetition weighs upon your soul. This is why the philosophy challenges our modern escapism so brutally. We rely on the concept of tomorrow or next week to excuse the mediocrity of today. We console ourselves with the notion that we can always start living authentically later. Eternal recurrence annihilates later. It demands that you treat this second, this conversation, this choice, this fleeting sensation as if it were the absolute climax of your entire cosmic existence, because, according to this thought, it is. If you cannot bear to repeat this minute infinitely, then why are you tolerating it even once? The resulting psychological shift, for those who truly internalize this test, is tectonic. The weight of infinite affirmation is the heaviest burden a human can carry. Yet it is also, paradoxically, the greatest source of liberation. It strips away the comfort of contingency. It forces you to practice amor fati, the love of one's fate, not just the good parts, but the entire messy, broken mosaic of your existence. If you can accept the pain and the boredom and the failure and still look at the cosmic timeline and scream more, then you have achieved a kind of existential integrity that transcends conventional morality. The ultimate sign of a wasted life is the desperate longing for change in the face of recurrence. Ask yourself now, while the silence settles and the future seems momentarily infinite, are you living a life you would willingly sign the contract to repeat for all eternity? Or are you banking on oblivion, the sweet, dark certainty of nothingness, to wipe the slate clean and absolve you of your unfulfilled potential? The universe, according to Nietzsche, is waiting to see if you have the courage to love your own repetition. Those who arrive here understand more than words. Leave a word below that captures what you felt tonight, and share it with someone who still searches for meaning.